In legendary Formula One rivalries, we previously shared the story of the rivalry that unfolded during the 2007 season. A duel that sparked one of the most intense and contentious fights in the sport's recent history. A sports drama resulting in a team's self-destruction, historic embarrassment, and two drivers without rewards. Today we get to remember the battle that followed that legendary duel. A fight between the season champion and once again Formula One, a triumph to make history in the sport. A sports fight that may not have been defined by its intense confrontations or potential controversy, but indeed for a path that led to two dramatic definitions, full of emotion, tension, and drama. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third chapter of legendary Formula One rivalries, Fernando Alonso versus Sebastian Vettel. Fernando Alonso Diaz and Sebastian Vettel. In 2010 and 2012, two drivers were the main characters of one of the most thrilling Formula One battles ever. A battle featuring two separate paths that would lead to two unmissable definitions in a campaign for the Formula One world title. To understand this rivalry, we must know that, unlike the Hamilton-Rosberg, or the Alonso-Hamilton, this fight was an indirect rivalry rather than constant on-track confrontations. Despite their confrontations, they followed different paths that ultimately led to a direct championship confrontation, which is the focus of this story's development. Before this contest, the two drivers had vastly different stories on their shoulders. The Asturian, who was world champion in 2005 and 2006 with Renault, had bet on the McLaren project. A project that backfired due to the Spygate controversy and the team's subsequent rejection of him. After this, he would have had to return to Renault to avoid further harm from the British team. In his 2 seasons with the French brand, he lacked the cars needed to dream of world championships. In those 2 seasons, he only achieved 2 victories, one in the Singapore Grand Prix and the other in the 2008 Japan Grand Prix. However, in 2009, he secured his future with Scuderia Ferrari. In the 2010 season, Maranello's team had performed poorly and needed changes to become competitive again. Among the decisions made was to fire 2007 world champion Kimi Räikkönen and replace him with Fernando Alonso. From that year onward, Fernando would don the Grand Circus Grid's most iconic colors. In contrast, Sebastian Vettel's story differed from his rivals as he entered the top category in 2007. Since then, he had been displaying excellent driving skills, which caught Red Bull's attention. They wanted him to join their young talent academy immediately. In 2008, he surprised the world by winning the Grand Prix at the historic Monza circuit with his modest Toro Rosso. Red Bull since its arrival to Formula One in the year 2005. They had worked with a single purpose. Not to be just another team on the grid, but they sought to be a benchmark, a constant contender. A team that would equip its drivers to compete for any world championship. In 2009, leveraging the changes in the single-seater's technical regulations, they fought for their first world championship. Unfortunately, no one, including they and Vettel, expected the team's surprise. Brawn GP, who together with a double diffuser, managed to dominate the first part of that season and gain a considerable advantage that allowed them to resist the onslaught of the energy drink team. Yes, in 2009, they lost the title, but this motivated them to begin the Redvolution. And for 2010, they would come with all the intention of not allowing the world titles to slip away from them again. Ferrari and McLaren were also ready to showcase their candidacies. Ready to return to their respective teams to the place they had always belonged. That, ladies and gentlemen, would kick off one of the best recent Formula One seasons. The beginning of the rivalry between Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso. The 2010 Formula One season is regarded as one of the greatest in history. One in which 3 teams and 5 drivers were contenders to fight for victories, and also for the reign of the category. Red Bull with Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel, Ferrari with Fernando Alonso, and McLaren with Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton. The 18 World Championship races promised excitement. The first date of the year would be run for the first time since 2006 on the layout of the Bahrain International Circuit, where Red Bull would achieve the first pole position of the season. Right behind them are Ferrari team drivers Felipe Massa and Fernando Alonso. During the race, the German driver demonstrated an impressive pace, decisively pulling away from all his competitors. However, on lap 34, he encountered an issue with his car, resulting in a loss of power. And would Ferrari take advantage of this to snatch the victory? Fernando, who overtook his teammate at the start, was poised to debut his new role as a Ferrari driver, with a victory, and after 49 laps. Alonso had achieved a Grand Prix victory in his first race dressed in red. A historic feat that only Nigel Mansell, Jimmy Raikkonen, Mario Andretti, and Luigi Musso had previously achieved. An unbeatable way to start a relationship with the team and an excellent way to go for the pursuit of the world title. The following races of that season would be marked by a huge constant. Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel's Red Bull were unbeatable in qualifying pace, but they were not as dominant in race pace. McLaren and Ferrari frequently challenged them on race days. Furthermore, their single-seater was unreliable, frequently suffering from various breakdowns. Like, for example, the aforementioned problem in Bahrain, or the weekend after with a problem in Sebastian Vettel's car brakes, which, once again, left the German empty-handed when he was on his way to victory. This would cause Vettel to have to wait until the third race of the year to be able to open his victory tally. A glorious victory, as championship leader Fernando Alonso retired due to engine reliability issues. The result was a tighter championship among several drivers, not just those contending for the title. At this point in the season, Sebastian was the fastest Red Bull driver, putting him in a good position, and he was their favorite to win the title. But little did he know that his teammate would decide not to make things so easy for him. After winning both the Spanish and Monaco Grand Prix consecutively, the Australian solidified his position as a strong contender, putting pressure on the Germans standing within the team. With two drivers competing as equals for the World Championship, Red Bull couldn't fully favor one over the other. In the fight and final two races, the Australian appeared to outperform the German. For the Turkish Grand Prix, again, the Australian would assert his authority, taking the pole position with quite a difference against his teammate, who could only be third behind Lewis Hamilton. But at the start, the German would snatch the position from the Englishman after a magnificent start. During the race's early stages, the battle focused on these three, with minimal track differences and each having a shot at victory. After the pit stops, the positions would remain the same. From then on, Vettel and Hamilton began outpacing Mark Webber. And Vettel, desperate to beat his teammate and pull away from Lewis Hamilton, would start to put more and more pressure on the Australian, but on lap number 40, Vettel would take that pressure too far. As Vettel attempted to overtake Weber, he closed in too much on his teammate mid-maneuver, causing a collision between them. Luckily for Mark, he was able to continue the race after the contact, but Sepp wouldn't be so lucky. The hit led to his second withdrawal this season, and his physical demeanor showed his annoyance. What were his thoughts on the maneuver? McLaren achieved a historic 1-2 finish, scoring valuable points for the World Championship. Red Bull secured Webber's third place, but after Sepp's withdrawal, he fell to fifth in the Drivers' Championship. 15 points separated them from their teammate, the World Championship leader. Fernando, for his part, would be in fourth position, separated from Vettel by just 1 point difference, with still a lot to play for in this season. Hamilton, Vettel, and Weber battled in the following races, dividing the next 4 wins of the season among them. After the British Grand Prix, Hamilton and Jenson Button would lead the drivers' table. Vettel and Fernando were less involved in this battle, with the Asturian at the biggest disadvantage, trailing Hamilton by 47 points. This was due to Ferrari's slow pace from the Monaco Grand Prix onwards. Fernando needed to close the gap with his rivals starting from the German Grand Prix to stay in the fight. But that would lead us to one of the biggest controversies of the season, 2010. Because, let's face it, it wouldn't be a chapter of legendary rivalries if there wasn't controversy involved. Ferrari improved their performance, securing second and third positions in the classification for the Hockenheim Ring race on Sunday. Vettel had a poor start, dropping to third place behind Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa, who had a fantastic start, and after the first curve he had moved into first position. During the race, Fernando would unsuccessfully try to snatch the position from his teammate from Brazil, and spent many laps behind him, trying without success. Over the radio, he began claiming he was faster than Felipe Massa. Ferrari later sent messages to the Brazilian driver indicating Alonso's faster pace on the track, following several complaints. But on lap 49, a message would come that would change everything and would go around the world. In a very indiscreet way, Ferrari had given a team order. Massa had to yield his position to his teammate. He would obey, and after the hairpin of turn number 6, he would abruptly slow down so that Alonso could overtake him. If you're new to Formula 1, you might wonder what's controversial about this. We've seen this multiple times recently, notably with Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. And indeed, the problem here is that team orders were banned for the year 2010. In fact, they were banned. This is reminiscent of a similar and embarrassing situation that occurred with Ferrari at the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix. After the events of lap 49, Fernando took the lead and went on to win the race, securing a 1-2 finish for Ferrari. And Vettel, who had made the pole position, would have to settle for third place. But the race wouldn't end here, as the controversy was just beginning. The image left by the podium was quite uncomfortable, Alonso celebrating the victory minimally, and Massa could only be seen with a totem face, showing how annoyed he was for having to obey the team order. But in the press conference, the journalists' fury against Fernando was monumental. They asked uncomfortable questions, such as whether this victory ranks alongside Singapore 2008, or if they should have disqualified him from the race. Or is it that you couldn't beat Massa on track and had to get the team to do it for you? The press asked questions that seemed intended to anger him. After facing the press, they would now face the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. And after this, Massa, Fernando, and Ferrari had to answer to the stewards. However, the penalty for this was ultimately very minor, as they were only fined €100,000, and the result of the Grand Prix remained unchanged, which left Fernando Alonso with the victory and the start of a pretty good streak from that point on. By this stage of the World Championship, it was evident that Ferrari solely relied on Alonso to contend for the win. It was clear this World Championship would be between him and the McLaren and Red Bull duo. After the Belgian Grand Prix, Fernando ranked 5th, the lowest position in the standings. With 141 points against Lewis Hamilton's 182, the leader of the competition, Hamilton and Mark Webber, seemed to be the favorites to win the championship. Meanwhile, Vettel quietly secured 3rd position, but remained significantly behind Lewis Hamilton in points. However, from this point on, the championship would give several unexpected surprises. Alonso defeated the dominant Red Bull in qualifying, securing pole position in the Scuderia Ferrari Hunt Grand Prix on the Monza circuit. Next to him would be British driver Jenson Button. He snatched the 1st position from Fernando at the start of the Italian Grand Prix. But at the turn of the Roja variant, Hamilton would collide with Massa and end up leaving the race. The World Championship leader would have to withdraw from that Grand Prix with 0 points. Therefore, if Fernando managed to win, he would be in a position to regain ground in the Drivers' Championship. For much of the race, he attempted, without success, to pass Jenson Button. It was clear that Fernando had a faster car, but simply the speed of the Mercedes engine on straights made it impossible for Fernando to take the position. But curiously, McLaren would be the architect of Alonso's victory, as a slow pit stop and the pace shown by Fernando would mean that after his stop, Ferrari would snatch the victory from the British driver and team. Alonso would manage to win in the best place for a Ferrari driver. He revived in his fight for the World Triple Championship. But luck smiled on him again at the Singapore Grand Prix, where he achieved victory once more. Once again, Lewis Hamilton had another contact that took him out of the race. With this, Fernando had already deducted 50 points. After this Grand Prix, Alonso made a huge leap to 2nd place in the Drivers' Championship. In Japan, Red Bull finally responded with a 1-2 finish led by Vettel, leaving the fight wide open. After Suzuka, Mark Webber was leading the World Championship with 120 points, followed by Fernando and Sebastian Vettel, tied with 206 points. And further behind them were Hamilton and Jenson Button, who had fallen behind in this fight. There were still 3 races to be competed and anything could happen, but I think few imagined what would happen. The 2010 Korean Grand Prix was scheduled for October 24th, 2010 at the Korea International Circuit in Yeongam. It would be regarded as one of the most shameful, absurd, and chaotic incidents in modern Formula One history. A circuit where they raced without completing it, revealing several details that exposed the organizers' lack of professionalism, and with asphalt that had just been adhered to the circuit a few weeks ago. To all the above, we have to add that precisely on the day of the race, a heavy rain would make its presence felt on the circuit, which, along with the other factors we discussed earlier, would generate one of the longest waits for the start of a competition. The race ran 3 safety car laps before being red flagged due to slippery asphalt. After over an hour of detention, the race resumed behind the safety car. It would take us 17 laps watching the world's fastest cars parade on a circuit sinking in shame. And that tested the love that each one had for the formula. The race would finally begin on lap 18 with Sebastian Vettel, Mark Webber, and Fernando Alonso leading the pack. The circuit looked more like a survival race than a Formula One Grand Prix. Lap 19 brought the day's first surprise, with everyone else taking over 2 minutes on the opening lap. The incident, along with a later collision with Nico Rosberg, forced him to withdraw from the competition. The World Championship leader was out after this incident. Of the 5 contenders, now only 4 remained on track. But this wouldn't last long, as with 9 laps to go until the end of the race, Sebastian Vettel suffered an engine failure, forcing him to abandon the race and handing the victory on a silver platter to the biggest rival at that time. Fernando would emerge victorious on the mountain of chaos that turned out to be that Korean Grand Prix. Luck had completely turned in his favor. 2 title rivals had been knocked out of the competition, and 1 more couldn't get into the points. Only he and Hamilton had been lucky enough to score in that race. After this, Fernando emerged as the leader, 11 points ahead of Webber and 25 points ahead of Sebastian Vettel. The World Championship became an ideal chance for him following Red Bull's catastrophe. The Austrians secured a 1-2 victory in the Brazilian Grand Prix, clinching their first Constructors' Championship. But Fernando emerged as the leader from Interlagos with his 3rd-place finish, 8 points ahead of Mark Webber, 15 ahead of Sebastian Vettel, and 24 ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So, the Spaniard and the Australian were the favorites to win the title of the 2010 season. As the bookmakers' favorite, the Spaniard appeared to be on track to secure his highly sought-after 3rd World Championship. Everything seemed to be in Alonso's favor. The throne was at his mercy to be taken again by the hand of the Asturian. But this is Formula One, and plot twists are more common than it seems. Ferrari and Alonso were favorites at the Jazz Marina circuit in Abu Dhabi, the venue for the final round of the Grand Circus Championship. All eyes were on Alonso on his triumphant return to the top. Documentaries, special videos, and other content were being prepared to celebrate Fernando's long-awaited 3rd championship title. For the first time in F1 history, 4 drivers had a mathematical chance to become world champion at the final race of the season. But Vettel and Hamilton were the ones with the least chances and who needed a miracle to achieve it. Even all the press speculated that, in case Red Bull was leading the 1st and 2nd position, if Vettel would let his teammate pass so that he could win the world title. But Sepp didn't want to give up, and his intentions were clear. Win the race and wait to see what happened behind him. Sebastian Vettel secured pole position while Fernando Alonso was 3rd, ahead of his main rival, Mark Webber, who only managed a disappointing 5th place. Everything seemed to be going smoothly for Fernando, who had taken a huge step towards achieving that much-anticipated triple championship. But a poor Grand Prix start would greatly complicate his task. Jenson Button overtook the driver, pushing them to 4th, just ahead of Mark Webber. Verstappen had to prevent Hamilton from passing to maintain his championship lead. But a few meters ahead, Schumacher and Vitantonio Liuzzi would collide dramatically, forcing the safety car to come out. Several drivers, including Nico Rosberg, Jaime Alguersuari, and Vitaly Petrov, took the opportunity to change their tires. It's very important that you remember these 3 names from now on. After the safety car, the race resumed with Beetle leader Hampton 2nd, Jenson Button 3rd, Fernando Alonso 4th, and Mark Webber behind. However, Felipe Massa was pressuring from behind to overtake him and ease the tension on Fernando Alonso. This or provoke a driving error in Mark, who in fact would commit. On lap 9, he made a slight error, colliding his right rear tire with the wall. On lap 12, Red Bull pitted Mark Webber to avoid a puncture in his wheel, and also to try to undercut Fernando Alonso. 4 laps later, Ferrari would decide not to take any risks. Taking advantage of Mark Webber being blocked by Jaime Alguersuari, they decided to put Fernando in the pits. The move seemed to have worked out perfectly, as after the stops, Fernando was still ahead of Mark Webber. The Ferrari pit was all smiles, everything going to plan. But the loudest laughter came from the Red Bull team in the background. Ferrari had fallen into a trap of which they were unaware at any moment. Do you remember the names I told you at the beginning of the video? After the stops, Alonso would fall behind Nico Rosberg and Vitaly Petrov, who didn't need to stop again. With those tires, they could finish the race. Alonso was virtually in 6th position. This considers drivers who didn't stop, and upon doing so, would end up behind them. And remember who was winning the race? Exactly Sebastian Vettel, the one who needed a miracle to become world champion? Well, that miracle had appeared. If Alonso wanted to become the world champion of Jazz, Marina had to finish in 4th position if Vettel won the race. For that, he urgently needed to overtake Vitaly Petrov and Nico Rosberg on the track. But lap after lap passed without it happening. The Jazz Marina circuit is a track where overtaking is extremely difficult. The Russian decided to have the race of his life that very day. As if his stay in Formula One depended on leaving Fernando Alonso behind, the laps kept running out and Fernando still couldn't overtake Vitaly Petrov. Despite Ferrari's encouragement, their driver couldn't improve the desperate situation. Alonso, resigned, inquired about Hamilton's chances of winning the race, but it was not to be. Fernando's triple championship was only in his hands, but the laps were running out. The options were slowly ending. On lap 47, Robert Kubica pitted and subsequently finished ahead of Vitaly Petrov. Things were getting even worse for Alonso, as it was not only about overtaking the Russian Nico Rosberg, now he also had to overtake Robert Kubica, with only 8 laps remaining in the race. Ferrari couldn't believe it. They were so worried about Mark Webber that they completely neglected Sebastian Vettel and fell into a perfect trap designed by Red Bull. And on lap 55, Vettel crossed the finish line, making the miracle a reality. The one who had nothing to lose would steal the World Championship title from Fernando Alonso for the season. 2010. Thank you. I love you. Thanks to Sebastian Vettel, you are the world champion. The world champion. Well done. Enjoy. You are the man. Thank you.